Calling all pitchers and pitching coaches, PitchDoc 2024 is your destination for revolutionary pitching education and information, from the newest technology to advances in biomechanics knowledge to take-home strategies and application for making your pitchers better today. Join us August 8th and 9th at the Westin O'Hare in Chicago. Experience transformative sessions led by leaders from the college game to technology companies to player development experts. Use promo code OGX Podcast to take an extra 10% off. Visit go.ogxsoftball.com/pitchdoc. Again, visit go.ogxsoftball.com/pitchdoc and use code OGX Podcast to take an additional 10% off. Spots are limited, so secure yours today. All right, we are back for another episode. This time I'm reporting from Kansas City. I'm going to say that every week because it's going to be in random places, and we'll judge where there's good internet. Because next week I'm in Dalton, Georgia, and that's going to be a test. That's going to be a test of what happens with internet, because Dalton, Georgia is a lovely town for those from it, but little isolated, just a little on the isolated side. So, all right, we're going to jump right in. Laura quote tweeted this tweet, so she's excited I picked it, but I think it's a great topic that we talk about, I think, a decent amount, and sort of what we maybe push ourselves to keep being better at OGX, but I think is an interesting concept. So the tweet is from Bob Alejo. I assume that's how you say his name. He's a strength coach, right, Laura?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
Coached with like Team USA, maybe track and field, and he's been in a lot of places, but I think he's a leader in his field. Obviously, there's some overlap with us, but more on the strength and conditioning side. But the tweet reads, "Undeniable truth. Technology and data are not cutting edge or game changing. Understanding the data and its actionable, I repeat, actionable application to sport are game changing. Practitioners, not technology and data, are the significant influence on performance and injury." So I think that this is an interesting topic. Where my brain went when I heard it was, we have a lot of times where like kids go to camps or things like that, and they'll say like they have a Repsodo, or like, you know, they have in-game data, or, you know, there's this idea that like there's some new sort of recruiting events being promoted, like tournaments where they're like, they have data. And I think it's just this conversation of like, I think back to when we first got data, Ashley, like when we first got Repsodo, and as people who's like had some knowledge in math and technology and things like that, like sort of blindly applied it incorrectly at the time, like thinking, not asking the right questions, not looking at it in the right way. And so I think it's a really interesting point. I think as the game of softball gets more down this, it's like people check the box more and more by saying like, we have data, we have technology. And what we often say is like, there's, you know, okay. And then what, you know, that's great information, but what are you doing with it? And how are you building systems around it? So interested to see your take. Maybe Laura, I'll throw it to you because I think you shared this tweet, obviously, but on some of your thoughts on it.
Yeah, that tweet, when it came across my feed, really, it spoke to me. And we're in this process of transitioning our systems into much more of a robust web-based app. And so we've thought very differently about how we present the data, because we have the opportunity now to rethink how we visualize, how we show this, what do we show the coaches versus, what do we show the athletes? And I've had conversations over the last couple of weeks about, wellness data and injury. And I just kept thinking, you can have all the data you want. You can have the largest data set in the entire world. But if there are not people with the appropriate coaching, clinical, professional background to provide human insights to that and to provide what it means for the context of that particular athlete, it doesn't serve you. It doesn't serve anybody, right? Having that data is only a piece of the puzzle, and the ability to take that information and turn it into usable knowledge, to use it from taking it from information to actual knowledge to then the wisdom of how you consult and guide and monitor athletes. That's the power, right? So, when an athlete says, oh, I've used Repsodo, I was at a camp, what usually then comes from that conversation is, but I didn't see my output, or I don't know what it means, or I they attach themselves to a particular metric because someone at that camp or someone along the line said, this is really important. And then, what we end up having conversations about is like, let's look at the big picture. And the big picture means taking all of those pieces of data and putting it together. And it just really, that tweet really spoke to me. It's like, it's the people. It's the people. And I think we've heard that a lot from other businesses, I think, that are in the same space as us, is like, you can buy all the tech you want. You can make the prettiest lab. You can spend millions of dollars. If you do not have the people to run that and make intelligent insights about it, I don't know. I feel like that's just not using it to its full capability. So this transition of data camps and all these things, it's like, I think we got to be really thoughtful of like, just because the data is collected is one thing, but who is helping you to understand it? Who is helping you to connect it to your own story? Who is helping you to tell your story through that data? It's really important. It's the people, it's the humans, it's those with the coaching and professional expertise to leverage that. And that was really what I quote tweeted, was like, it isn't enough. You have to know how to leverage it. And leveraging it means taking this evidence-based coaching approach and saying, here's the information, my coaching knowledge or my clinical knowledge. And then what? I have this athlete in front of me. It's her story for her unique things. And then what am I doing with it? And it's the leveraging part. Collect all you want, but until you leverage it and use it, and I always say a data point collected in our facility is never a data point wasted, right? We really try to be thoughtful of collecting data that is only stuff that we use and stuff that it impacts our ability to coach and manage our athletes. And that's the secret sauce. It's not the data itself. It's the people that can leverage it for you. That's the stuff that really matters.
Yeah, for sure. Ash?
Yeah, I thought similar to what you did, Chris. I thought of our 2017 selves when we first invested in the tech. We first brought it on board, and I assumed on any given night it was Rapsodo was laying down on the cage, and I was like, "Do you see all this? And this is good, and you should do this." I'm sure I was doing that. I can't remember. But I'm sure I was doing that. And it's just that definitely didn't help anybody and arguably could have hurt someone. I don't know if I was emphasizing things enough to train around those concepts. And when you don't know what you're talking about, what you're looking at, there's no power at all. Laura and I have had this conversation before. What we've said is if you don't know what you're looking at, then having no data is better than having data that you're misinforming about, because at least there's some sense of you're just applying the human element to catching to coaching, what you're seeing on the ball, what an athlete feels like those are the data points you start taking in, which is also data, which is different, but
still valid.
But if you throw down a piece of technology and you put that in the mix and you don't know what you're looking at, and therefore you don't know what to say, and so you start making things up, maybe. No judgment, been there back in 2017. But I think that's, to me, it's worse than just being there without it. So there's stages to me. There's this stage of okay, I don't even know what I'm looking at. And so I'm kind of making my way, I don't know if it's a misread versus that looks good. I don't know if that's that can't be right, or that's not typical for you. I just don't understand it enough to even communicate to you. Then you shouldn't be communicating about it. Then there's a level of I understand it. I can speak this basic, what's good and what's not, but you have to understand that has its limitations as well. This is where I think you're getting, Laura, with the camp concept. If we know we have an athlete who, has a really good such and such pitch, and it's worked, she's worked to be able to develop certain break profile on it. And then it's not traditional or cookie cutter, but then she goes to a camp and they're like, well, a drop needs to have X, you need to work on Y. So it's not that that's wrong information, but they don't have a sense of as you're saying, an overview, something larger. Mm-hmm. It's sort of understanding basic things. It's kind of like when someone's your spin efficiency needs to go up on that pitch. Your spin rate needs to go up on that pitch. Something just real, single-minded, tunnel vision. It's not particular to that athlete. It doesn't have anything to do with sort of larger. So maybe that can help them kind of knowing some basic knowledge, but you should also understand that there's some limitations if you understand data, but don't have some sort of system for it to really communicate about who that athlete is and what, she should be striving for. So yeah, delicate. And I think the reality is coaches they probably hear this and think like, yeah, that's why we don't get into it. So the real concept of it, what's really tricky is that if you don't get into it at all, you're getting left behind.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we're like, it is a tough climb, because we're like, if you know too little, you could really do your athlete a disservice. If you don't know enough, so it's intimidating for coaches. I get it. It's obviously why we feel so strong and so passionate about like educating as much as possible so that coaches can know just enough to be able to like use it, stay in the game, stay relevant in those, and how they utilize it. But the reality is it is a tough climb. We sit on the player development side. Our entire jobs are about reading data, soaking it in, systemizing it, spitting it back out, using it for feedback. That's our entire world. So there's very few, if any, coaches who have the luxury of doing that. So I think it's also this recognition of like, I agree wholeheartedly with that tweet. It's really powerful. It's what we take a lot of pride and passion in doing well here. But also, that's not the same process for a standard coach. It takes a lot of work. And it's obviously why we spend so much time with coaches and consulting and such to help them along that process.
And to be honest, when I came on board, you guys already had Rapsodo and had some tech. And when I came on board, it took us a while just observing. You were seeing things on the spot in Rapsodo. We then added the power of insight. We then upgraded to hit tracks. There was an observation period, and that is absolutely healthy. It doesn't mean that if you don't know, you should never invest in technology. It's more of grab the technology, but sit back and observe for a little bit. Let that data be collected. Try to see if there are, there are trends that you're seeing among the athletes that you coach that maybe speak about your larger systems, right? That if all of your pitchers only throw gyro, I'm just making things up. If only your pitchers only throw gyro, or everybody struggles with this particular spin direction, then that might speak to your coaching methods. But it doesn't mean that it was wrong. It just means that you are better informed now of maybe some of your own internal biases, which we all have, about how you coach your athletes. And so there is an observation period that I feel is necessary. If I talk to a coach who's just got ball flight in front of them for the first time, my best advice is just like collect data for a couple of weeks and just look at it. Don't try to find the story, just observe it. Look at it, see what you're seeing for an individual athlete, see what you're seeing maybe across a couple athletes. You won't really understand the right questions to ask unless you know what the data is actually telling you, right? What all the metrics mean, the fact that you've got spin direction plus a gyro degree plus spin efficiency equals break. So chasing one of those things becomes a little short-sighted. And so you've got to see the bigger picture, and you have to just sit and observe. And I think that can sometimes feel like, well, I have this technology, I'm not leveraging it. You are. You're just leveraging it in a way that you're letting it talk to you a little bit and checking it against your coaching expertise, and then deciding to make decisions. It's the let me get this tech and let it tell me how to coach. No, that's the opposite effect, right? We don't want to do that either and say, okay, well, I thought this was a drop ball, but it's not. Let's do X, Y, and Z. How about we just collect a little more data points, sample sizes, and having a group of data of things to talk about becomes much more important than a single data point or a single pitch, single hit, etc.
I hear kind of like I like in his tweet, I kind of hear three phases. One is get the tech. Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of people are in that phase, which is just like, I get the tech and then I'm there, which is kind of where we were in the initial stage. The second is make it actionable. And to make it actionable, you have to have enough data. And it doesn't have to be all from you. Like I would argue, if you seek the right people, if you get a Rapsodo tomorrow and start collecting on your pitchers, or you get a hit tracks tomorrow and start collecting on your hitters, there's tons of data out there. You need to find the right people, have put that in a context that you can understand. But you can start understanding that pretty fast because there is enough data collected in our game to understand that. But to make it actionable in a way, and I think that first phase is like, okay, I understand that an elite drop needs to have this break, and this kid is getting this, and this is how she gets it. And so this is on the spot how I can create some action to get that to be more, or, this is a hitter and she can't pull it. And I know she needs to, and I can watch her spray chart and I can in the spot make it actionable. And then I think the final phase, which is which is really, Ashley, I think kind of to your point, what is probably the hardest phase for coaches to be in, which is let's make that very repeatable, meaning that the systems from those actions are in such, we know if I do this, it's going to have this effect in most cases. And so now I can just keep applying these systems in order to manipulate the data I'm receiving over and over, which is what we are working really hard. We have worked really hard to build in this past. Most coaches aren't there and maybe don't need to be there. Like, you know, if I have 3 pitchers on staff and I can create action based on the data I have in the spot, I mean, there could be some downsides to that, right? You might not see something coming the way that you should, you know, whether it's on a workload thing or, you know, you kind of interject yourself too late, or, you know, you're not interjecting yourself in a way that's sticking because you're kind of on the spot. But I think a lot of coaches could live in that actionable space and be they're in a good spot. You know, they're in a good spot. They're probably getting, and then if you want to take yourself to the next level and really have some leverage over your competitors or really be able to help your athletes, is creating those systems that make that action you're taking just repeatable. You know exactly when to take what action, you know when to do it. I think where it gets really dangerous, it's a little, you know, a little dramatic, it's a softball, but where it gets a little dangerous is when you haven't looked at a picture, you're not even in the actionable space and you're just reporting, you know, data and you're putting it out there. And I might have even said this last week already because it's now my favorite freaking analogy from Tony Rico. So if Tony's listening, I'm just going to quote him constantly. But when you're putting things out there, he said, like, it'd be like putting an MRI machine in everyone's house. And they would just like put themselves through the MRI and be like, I'm dying, you know, from the report, because they don't understand what to do with it. And we see that all the time, which is if you just report data to people, they're like, my spin rate is low, this is bad, you know, I do X, I have a great exit velocity, they report all of these things, and you're like, you can't take action on any of this. You don't even know, like, these are so out of context. You're just saying random things. So that, I think, is kind of what we're talking about. That place is like, if you feel like you're in that place as a coach, what I would probably say first and foremost is that action and context, it does exist. Go find it. You can come look at some of the stuff we put out there, go to the tech company themselves and ask for it. Like whatever it is, like that does exist out there. You just might have to ask around a little bit for the context. And then what you want to work towards is like, okay, I feel like I'm in a good spot with actionable. Like I understand what I'm trying to influence or why. And then it's like, get yourself in a place over the next few years where that system becomes clear. And it's not just like on the spot, random, you're grabbing Sally and you're doing X, Y, Z.
So this is kind of where like the work we've done at the college level, I might argue, I'm sure there are some, like levels, there are some tiers where it's okay for at the college level to just be in the like coaches are actionable, kind of like on the spot. In the world of pitching right now, where there are not enough pitchers with enough stuff, the injury, I really, really believe that where the college game needs to get better is between tier 2 and tier 3. I think it's starting to become not optional, which is why this year, obviously, we've had so many talks about like, this is what we've worked hard to be able to do, is to elevate our systems to be like, they're a different tier, and how we're managing athletes, how the data is coming back to us, informing us, and then allowing us to go back. And it's just this constant feedback loop. Obviously, that's why we're working hard on this web-based app to be able to like have a actual management system that others can utilize, because that's, for me, I'm like super passionate about getting that in the hands of more coaches, because I'm like, just like in a bullpen, understanding what the data is doing. Of course, it's better than someone who doesn't have that at all. It is just so far from being enough, I think, right now in the college game when it comes to pitchers. The demands are too high. There are too few athletes out there carrying the workload for the number of games we've got. And I think it's a game changer if we can help coaches start to split that gap. It's way too much to ask them to do it on their own. I don't care if they've got someone in player development, they've got GAs, they've got whatever. You're creating something from scratch, right? And so it's sort of like knowing they don't have time to like let's sit and collect this for the year and then do this, which is really what our process has been, this slow organic build. They don't have time for that. They've got to win. And so it's really why I feel like, if we can get this system concept into the hands of more coaches, particularly for hitters also, but particularly for pitching, just because of the issues with pain and the management of it and such, but and the drastic changes in performance that we see because of fatigue. But if we can get that into more coaches' hands, I do think we could start to bridge that gap. And I just don't see a world where it doesn't mean you can't be successful if you don't have this, this management system or something like that. You might have your own version of it, but many people don't. And it's what's keeping them from that next thing.
It's leaving it's leaving pitchers and hitters, leaving everybody untapped. You're leaving people untapped, or you're leaving athletes in scenarios where you aren't able to manage them effectively, right? Whether that's from a pain and injury standpoint, whether it's from growing performance or maintaining velocity, whatever the goals are, you're going to miss stuff. You're going to miss stuff that could potentially put together someone's story, and I think those are the things where, go ahead.
It's almost like the second tier can get you rolling through the early season because everything can be so late.
Make you might not catch the downs and things like that from that system for sure.
Yeah, just not enough of a constant feedback loop. And so likely what you're going to see is just this slow decline that you can't even see. It's so slow, that you can't see it until you realize whoa, it's here.
Right.
I don't know if my hands are on the screen, but it's here and it used to be here, but the decline was so gradual, it wasn't apparent until it became drastic.
Right.
So
it's
that's essentially.
The boat's had a hole in it, but the hole is the size of the pin, and things just leak, it's just leaking and filling, and the boat is sinking. But without that, the feedback loop that's a really great visual, that feedback loop of whether it's wellness data, whether it's reps out of hit, whatever it is. That data, it just serves as information. It's information about the athlete, and it should come from multiple sources. It should come from self-reported wellness stuff. It should come from objective things. And, there are plenty of limitations about the tech that's out there. There are limitations about the tech we use every single day. But as you start to use it more, you start to understand, okay, this is a limitation of the way this technology exists and how it collects that information, how it reports it back to us. We spent a whole podcast talking about the way that data comes back and how we've had to work so hard to put it in the right context, to put it in the right buckets, to be really thoughtful. I love the MRI machine analogy. It's perfect. To be very thoughtful.
That's what we see all the time. Our athletes get a hold of something, they're like, I'm dying. My spin rate's down, or it's something so out of context because
I would love to have an MRI machine in my house.
I know.
I'd be calling
MRI vision. That's my superhero powers. MRI vision.
I'm definitely dying. I see this dot on the MRI.
I'm like, I need to be perfect. Let me find.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So funny.
But
you know what I liked what you said is it needs to be multi-source. I mean, the reality is, imagine if we're you just had a single, when we think of technology, it's I have a Rapsodo, I have Yakurtech. I just have a single thing of technology, and that's what's giving me feedback. That's that's what we know. It's that is not enough. The multi-source, multi-sources of data, including wellness, including things that you're seeing in the strength floor, including self-reported, questionnaires, including ball flight
data if you can.
It was Krista, you and I talked about this. You and I talked about this morning. We were going through, some of the things that we need to make some updates to in the app before we really go full launch here. And I said, man, it'd be really great to have think of a graph that had a pitcher's fastball velocity over some period of time, her power data, her wellness data, other things that are layered on top. And it made me think of a couple days ago, I responded to a parent who was asking about, movement quality and power and growing velocity. And I went to multiple points and I said, okay, here's the data from her velocity, but also here's her movement quality. So you may not be seeing, velocity going up in a direction that is in their mind as high as it could be. But let's go back to the other places where she's shown improvement. Let's go back to the other places where, despite, having other sports and being in season constantly, she has made progress. And that requires multiple sources of information. If the only thing, we know the velo obsessed culture, right? If the only thing that parent, that athlete, whoever is looking at is velocity, then that story looks like we aren't doing our job. right? But to be able to pull in movement quality, to show that for where she is, she's making great progress, to show power going up, to show that her wellness is maintained, her physical readiness, mental readiness. I mean, that's the story, especially given that she hasn't had an off season yet, like
Laura,
it's gotta be
what this reminds me
multifaceted.
of? I have this conversation a lot, obviously, because everyone wants to talk about velocity,
Right.
But I think to myself, you could never predict injury. But we obviously can start to see some underlying like red flags for people as far as their level of stability, their like sort of fatigue, how it weighs on them. That's underneath of what they're doing in pitching. And I think to myself, this athlete may not have pushed through in the performance metrics yet, but the fact that this athlete who started with zero movement quality,
Totally,
very unstable, super fatigued, is feeling good, is healthy, is throwing how much she is right now with no pain, but it's hard. There's no comparison. There's no like trend line. Like, like this is where you were pitching. This is where you are pitching. That's such a clear trend line. It's like, if we could go back and show you not training, like, yeah, your training is paying off. You don't know it because you can't it's not like you have some sort of control group to compare it against, is what I'm getting at. You can't go back in time, take that training away, and it's like, see, you were hurt,
you can only compare it to their own story. That's I think one of the hardest things, to get nerdy for a second, but that's one of the hardest things when people say, well, how do you prove that your stuff works? We prove it case by case with each athlete, because it's hard to say, well, I know our stuff has a benefit. If you're like, I want to design a research study, and we know using plyos in pitching, overhand throwing, overload, underload bats, training with variability is so beneficial and healthy. If you know that to be true, right, and you see the results, you can't have a control group where you take that away. That's really unethical, right? If you know something has a benefit, basic research ethics say you can't create a control group and then take away that benefit. So we're always going back to the assessment process. That's her baseline, right? And to be able to show the story of, okay, yes, for this particular athlete, she's a little younger, velocity has not grown a ton, but to put the timeline together, and in my brain, the puzzle is always what I want to go for. I want to put the puzzle together, to put her puzzle together and to see, but look at what she's done in other areas. She's healthy, she's thriving, she is managing herself, her movement quality is improving, despite being in season, multiple sports. That's a story that's easier to tell than you've only gained 2 miles an hour since January, right? You've got to put it into context. And I think having access to that technology, and again, Rhapsody is just the example in my brain. It's like, maybe we can step away from being so velo obsessed if we can just bring in other metrics and like break. But then we get even further away from being velo obsessed when we start putting our goals into things that really matter for the human, which is like, am I healthy? Am I thriving? Am I mentally prepared? Is my movement quality improving? Am I bulletproofing myself against the sort of insidious nature of pitching injuries? Am I not overswinging with pitching or with hit volume, swing volume, and maintaining my health? And I see a world in the next couple of years where player health, pitcher health especially, man, it's going to make or break some teams. It's going to make or break some teams. I think it already has this year, of how you manage your players and their health is going to make or break some teams.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to change us. I'm going to pivot here. We started talking about this last week, and I'm very into the topic right now, which is, it's a hitter's mindset of how they approach. So I'm going to give an example, because I think it is just like a great bringing in many layers of where softball is right now. I had a scrimmage with my 18U team, and we scrimmaged against our 16U team. So these are kids that I know all their pitch data because they train with us. So I know what their pitches do and what they call them versus what they do. And so I would say, like, okay, Susie's coming in for them. What pitches does she throw? What do her pitches do? And they all would say, like, she throws a curve, rise, drop, fastball, whatever. And so we started having a conversation of, okay, labels are literally irrelevant. If I'm a hitter, coming up with what labels this person throws is not helpful to how I approach my at-bat. And so what we talked about was the base. What we know from all the data is that the base expectation of what I'm going to see is that if I see a righty, it's a tiny bit of sink and a tiny bit of glove run. And if I see a lefty, it's a tiny bit of sink and a tiny bit of glove run the other direction, right? So that's what you're basing it off of. And so what we changed our conversations and what we've been prepping for is expect that on the person we don't know, And then your communication was it different than that?
Mm-hmm.
Was she able to do something different than that? How much does she do the different? And what are you prepping for? So does it hold the line longer, right? So we talk about gyro, which gyro solely by itself doesn't play at the collegiate level either, but it's different than -3 or -3+3. It's different. So at first it's like, does it hold the line longer? Does it sync more than that, right? There's more sync than that. Does she change speeds? Does she whatever? And that is what your communication becomes. Not Sally throws a rise, curve, drop, because like one of the kids, for instance, in the 16 throws a curve is her best pitch, but it's a -8, -4 pitch. So if we're prepping for some sort of out pitch, that's not the difference it has on it. The different that pitch has on it is more sync. And that's the shape we're trying to match. So the communication you're having is like, what's the shape you're matching? I talked to a international player. We were talking, she sent me a live at bats and she was facing a lefty. She's a righty and she was getting jammed. And she said like, I just felt a little bit like I was getting jammed. And she sent me videos. And what I said to her is like, you're not late, but what is the shape of that pitch? It's a lefty. So what's different for that pitcher than what you're used to facing? It's going to break, we can assume that it's probably going to break a little into your barrel, which is different for righties. That's not what they face all the time. And so you have to understand that that's the shape you're defending against. So yes, if you don't know that and you just swing the same way you do on a righty that's ball kind of tails away from you at the last second, then your barrel's not getting to the right spot. And that's what you're sort of defending against. I think it's been such an interesting conversation that, my 18U team has done a good job with it, and we'll see how we can do it over the summer. But that's what you're prepping as a hitting coach. And I think to go back to last week when we talked about pitching, then to make that more and more and more complicated for the hitters is what you're building as a pitching coach, which is not just same thing. You're not going out in the summer and recruiting, I need a drop ball pitcher and a rise ball pitcher. And it's not a label thing. It's like, I already have a drop kid that goes -8 and it has no horizontal run. That's different. People don't see that a lot. But what happens if that's all I have and the team preps for that? Then can I add, maybe I have another drop kid, but she has some horizontal run, or maybe I have, what do I add on? That is the conversation you should be having. And I think this is it's a very different way to approach hitting. I always laugh. I think of, some kids we have that have these off-speed rise, for instance, and the other team is always like, sit on the change. They're just so mad. They just don't understand. And what you actually need your kids communicating about that is not she has a changeup, but when she throws off speed, the break is different than I'm used to. It kind of like holds a little bit. It almost looks like it's coming up a little bit. Like that's the communication you want your kids to be having, not just like she throws a changeup. It's like, well, that's not super helpful. So that's where my brain goes. I don't know, Ashley, how you would attack pitching based off that, but I think that's what you're prepping for. And this first start of it is to get your hitters talking like that, so that then that's how they're, prepping. And travel ball, could we go spend the time we would need to like hit all of those shapes? Probably not. So you're going to have an advantage just having the communication of like, let's try. Okay. It really went away from my barrel. I wasn't expecting that. It went away from my barrel in this direction. So that's what you're defending against. That's the first step in travel ball. In college, you could prep for that more. But those are the conversations.
It's kind of like lowest common denominator hitting. And you're like, what is that you just assume the pitcher is average and let her prove to you that she's not average before you start preparing hitters for all these complex scenarios and realizing that most pitchers they're average in that way. What they create on the ball, it's the unique ones that then you have to prepare for. I'll let Ashley obviously take it from a pitching standpoint.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the only other layer that I would probably include in that is like the quadrants, essentially, of like where
location.
Yeah, and because it's like this kid has her best pitch, it breaks up, but she only ever throws that out of the zone, right? And so there's some element of that. So I think like thinking of a lot of the pitchers that we have here, what we're trying to do is first identify, do they have something that breaks that's good? Like, do they have a good break profile? Is it limited, which it usually is? Can they throw it one half of the plate versus the other? And can they throw it through the zone and out of the zone? And it's very rare for them to be able to do all four of those, right? Because if it has a horizontal component to it, it kind of limits that it can go in this direction. Maybe they just can't access it. If it's a rise, for example, it is a very complicated concept. It's for some pitchers to understand how to hold the hand position, but get it off earlier, essentially. So what we try to do here is leverage what's your best tool, and can you manipulate, forget variability in a different spin direction first, forget change of speed yet. How much can you manipulate that pitch throughout the zone on either half? Because what you see is like, what you might see as a hitter is like that pitch has this big drop ball. It's only low and away. If you see something hard in, that's her flat pitch. Like that's the pitch she's just trying to like, that's her complement pitch. She can't throw that pitch low and in. So if you see inside through the zone, like that's it, because that's the one. So I think it's also like that layer. Some of this is hard. You're jumping, travel ball's hard. You're jumping from team to team. You don't have all this time to do this research. By the time you might see all of that, time's up and you have an inning left or something, so I get it. In travel ball, that might be a little bit hard, but at the college level, this is the way, we kind of like are thinking about pitching here. And then it's like, what can we expand? Is there a different break profile? Likely, highly likely that different break profile is just a complement. It's a gyro pitch that really feeds a good complement. It is something that creates some sense of separation. We are typically, for majority of pitchers, not talking, here's this big rise and then this big drop, like break wise. We're not seeing a ton of that. It's very rare. And then obviously this like change of speed concept. With also, as you're saying, Krista, where we haven't gone, it's like, what spin direction is that change of speed, right? Like,
right, because your barrel is going to do different things for those two things. So I think it's interesting. Sure. And kind of what we talked about last week is like, okay, let's assume that what Kennedy threw last year was bullet 72, right? So maybe it had some run horizontal or something, but bullet 72. What we know is very few people throw that. And so in reality, if I'm prepping my hitters, I'm not prepping for that. Like I'm not prepping on a daily basis at any level to see that because I see it so infrequently, which is what makes her great. Montana Fouts great. It's what made them great, even with maybe arguably at times in their career, limited elite tools, right? Limited elite tools. And so then it's like, okay, if I have a week to prep for that, if I have a little bit more time, if more people start throwing like that. So I think you've seen this in MLB where like the four seam pitch is sort of, that's their backspin hard pitch. Everyone kind of went to that. They went away from the sink because the sink fastball was so common that if I could throw the four seam fastball, I got out of common. Well, then the hitters, eventually enough pitchers started throwing that and the hitters got more used to that. And so then we had to adjust as pitchers that we had to throw something off that to make them guess. So Nyjah threw a changeup. All of a sudden, I'm like, I barely ever see 72 gyro. So, like pat on my back if I prep for that. And then all of a sudden, there's some freaking weird changeup coming that I have to prep for. That's how you prep as a pitcher. So it's like everyone's scared of their data coming out. It's like, this is how you learn tools. There are tools that are elite enough. They are elite enough, meaning they happen so infrequently that it doesn't matter how much time a team has to prep. Like they're not going to think of like how you allot your time over the year. I'm not going to allot my time prepping for Nyjah when 95% of the season, I do not face that. That's not a good use of my time, So that's what makes elite pitchers great. It makes them have tools that people just don't prep for. It's what makes arm side freakish, It's just like, who's going to spend their time prepping for an arm side kid when you see it twice? They're not. And so you're going to get away with that tool, even if it's limited, until more pitchers throw it. And then when more pitchers throw that, and I think we've seen this a little bit, as we start seeing more kids throwing 70, 71 with gyro, okay, the hitters are like, I have adjusted my swing to this pitch. I am more used to this. I have prepped for this. It makes more sense for me to prep for this. Then you got to add something off that as the pitcher. And I think we just don't, it's just random how we prep right now. It's random that we're like, we need a down and up, a side, a side.
Cutter.
Right. It's like,
here we need the curve. Here
we're
comes
prepping.
This. It's like,
we're picking pitchers. We're like, we're going to build staffs, but we're building those staffs based off labels. And then we're prepping our hitters based off labels. And like, that's not, let's understand when a kid has something, what does this kid do that's different, and then as a hitter, I take a more nuanced approach to how I approach that kid because it's like, oh, this is different. And like, I can't adjust right now in this game. So what am I going to do to make her uncomfortable or have to throw more pitches or get tired or something? But not approaching everything as like, oh, wow, she has a curve. It's like, well, does she? Like, do you need to take an insane approach, or is that pitch just outside doing what everyone else's outside pitch does? And should you just swing to that and pick the right location to swing at that pitch, you know? So,
or just wait for a mistake. Like your Niger example, just wait for a mistake, you know, being able to recognize the pitch and know that, okay, maybe I haven't prepped my barrel for that. Maybe I haven't prepped my swing adjustability for that, but I can pounce on a mistake. I can pounce on something that's not that is something I prepared for. But it's just recognizing that, like, you're just trying to hit the lowest common denominator. You know, what is the thing you're going to face the most? I love that approach. I think that's incredibly efficient.
And I think it matters a lot because we start talking different as coaches for like, okay, we're just using Nyjah. She's ridiculously good. So what is this?
Right.
But like if Nyjah comes down a tier in velo, that takes her out of the conversation we're having, which is she becomes closer to what hitters have seen. Mm-hmm. And so that really matters as a pitching coach to know those things, right? Is that this gets out of that territory where hitters, you know, haven't seen this or haven't prepped for this. It gets closer to what their barrels are used to, what their body is used to, what their posture has gone to. And I think that's the thing. And we see all the time is that from a hitting standpoint, I see hitters all the time that like, they're really good at the one thing. You're going to throw -3, you're a righty. You're going to throw -3 to them. And this speed, they're going to hammer it because that's exactly what their swing has been designed for. And so, you know, you start going off of that as a pitcher, you weed out a lot of hitters. And as hitters, what you should be prepping for if you're going to keep going to the next level is to not be that kid. Because when you get to the next level, the pitchers don't do that. They throw, there's much more variability on that. And you got to be the hitter to stay in the lineup in multiple situations who can adjust to those different types of, not everything, that's just probably not realistic, but at least have, you know, you've removed as many boxes that you can as a hitter to adjust to that. So I think that's, anyways, I don't know. That's probably way more to come from that topic, but I think it's something very interesting to think about. All right. We're going to do our question really quick. I think this one we're going to hammer. I don't know that. I think we're going to hammer this one. So
have we not hammered a question yet?
I don't know.
God, we always hammer the question.
Yeah. Okay. The question is from Kirsten Verdun, the pitching coach at U of I. I'm going to go ahead and play it.
Hi guys, this is Coach V from the University of Illinois. My question is, how do you, once you get the pitchers moving better, kind of building them up into 100% effort into things, how do you get them to understand how to be explosive off the ground and quickly in that very small time frame that they have to effectively use the ground when they feel very comfortable, you know, moving at 75%, because that's where they have learned to stabilize.
The question is basically when you've trained your pitchers at lower intensities, so they've done 50 and 75% and they're feeling good there, how do you transition them into 100%, understanding the sort of like time window they need to create that and to like translate it into full intensity? So Ash, you up.
Okay. That's a good question, actually.
Yeah.
I think that's a good one. Okay. So the low intensity is critical for pitchers for a variety of reasons. One, because we have to prep to throw at high workloads, high volumes. And so if we simply did that as we always have done traditionally, if you think, okay, I need to prep this athlete to be able to throw 120 innings or 120 pitches a game, then she needs to be doing that on a regular basis. What happens is the chronic workload becomes too much. Okay. It's just way too much at high intensity. So the way that you can continue to support her building up her, her resilience against demands like that, workload demands like that, is to keep her throwing, but keep her throwing at more moderate intensities to keep more fuel in the tank. Okay. That's one reason for it. The second reason is, when we are trying to get pitchers to move more efficiently, meaning get the middle of the body to do more so that the levers, let's say neck position, stride leg, mostly arm action, can get into a better position in order to achieve something more on the ball. It's because it wants to create more stretch, more length, to be able to put more velocity onto the ball. You're trying to manipulate your hand position for a certain spin. We know that's going to come from having a little bit better arm slot. These are the reasons why we're attacking things. Maybe you're just going after velocity. Then we're trying to get the body to contribute more. Where repatterning happens is at a more moderate intensity. It's where the brain can register where you are in space. It's where you can start to feel. It's where intent is at its max. So the pitcher can start to really understand. And then there is this element of like, well, it's got to translate. It's why I always say, like, it's why we don't do like traditional drills. What you end up coaching is so that they just get good at the drill. And who cares if you're good at the drill if you're not good at the real thing, right? If it doesn't translate to the real thing, it's literally a waste of everyone's time. So what Kirsten's kind of saying is like, we're not that interested in making our pitchers look great at 75% if it doesn't get to the real thing, right? Which I hear. So what an approach we often take here then is when we say, okay, everything about feel, feeling your arm action, how it felt to unravel it like that. Like your brain is processing all of that. Now we're going to come to high intensity. And in order to give it a shot, to tap into the types of patterns and the things we did at more moderate intensities, there is a very specific window of time where you have to work from ground up. It means you have to work fast in order for the body to have a chance to move like you did at low intensity. If pitchers are struggling with that concept, so we know it's from ground to when their arms extend, when someone's to the catcher, when someone says use your legs, use the ground, that's the window of time, man. If we're not getting it done in that window of time, it's not going to happen. So sometimes if pitchers are struggling with that, we will give them something to prep them for intent. We will give them some sort of aggressive med ball throw against the wall where they have to really think about what is my body trying to do in that window of time and how fast can I do it? So it's really like it is about this like organic translation from moderate to high, but they're also kind of separate concepts. It's like when I don't have to capitalize this window of time, can I control rotation? Can I understand what my arm action is trying to accomplish? Well, we're going to hammer that. And now to give that a shot in hell to come through, now I have to make sure this window of time, I'm getting done what I need to from ground up through hips. So it's two separate concepts in some way that we have to bridge. And like I said, some athletes typically, in our experience, some athletes are power type of kids, right? You can see, we measure how much power they're producing and where they're producing that. They are more sort of anterior dominant, posterior dominant, whatever that looks like. However, when they're power kids, they don't struggle with this. They don't struggle with how to move fast. They struggle with how to control the body when it's moving fast. So the low intensity seems to be like, we've got to really keep them there. When athletes are lower power kids and you're trying to go for power, you can't live in low intensity too much because they struggle to move fast. So they are feeling great, moving along at those moderate intensities. But it's like, you got to get them out of that and you got to really push them. Like, this won't matter unless we can start understanding how to move quicker in this window of time. So there's some categorization there. It's an understanding of where those athletes fall to know the approach. It doesn't mean that I don't think like these lower power kids should not be at lower intensity, but you've got to understand its purpose. And then you've also got to understand its limitations and then where to drive it. So that would be my answer. It's environmental design and training. It's complicated as hell, but it's understanding what are the goals for that athlete? Is it control over her body in the motion? Is it moving faster within the motion? What does she have to work with? And then how do I design an environment to basically get her prepped in a way that she's comfortable, but then really push her where she needs to fill that gap. So it's not an easy concept, of course. It's obviously the work that we spend a lot of time doing here, but that would be my answer. It's not a cookie cutter answer, as nothing is. If you, have listened to anything we've talked about, it's always a little bit individualized, but those are the buckets that I would kind of think of and that we think of regularly here.
My addition to that is what's happening in strength and conditioning. That's my addition to that. Like, absolutely. Like in the bullpen, in the pitching training environment, when you have someone who is, you said, what does she have to work with? Right. And so the growth of movement quality, is kind of like piece one, so to speak. We want pitchers to be stable so that their trunk can contribute, so that their levers don't do all the work. And, we've had scenarios where that depending on time of year, sometimes what they're doing in strength and conditioning is a little bit of a mismatch, right? That maybe they are working on things that are a little bit more of heavier load and not trying to move as quickly. But if you're not in collaboration with your strength coach and saying, okay, in these environments that are not pitching, take the weight room where things are a little, I'll say less complicated, because pitching will always be the most complicated thing that any pitcher does. When it's less complicated, we might be working on maybe single plane movements that are very related and tap into the right things in pitching. Is she moving quick there, right? Is she growing her ability to create a rate of force production that even allows her to tap into that time window as a pitcher, right? And so if all she's doing underneath of pitching, let's take a very extreme example, is long, slow runs, you know what I mean? That engine ain't built to move fast then, you know? And so the match of strength and conditioning.
People in the back.
Is that one of those, like, let me shout it from the rooftops? Then the engine ain't ready, right? And so the match of strength and conditioning, which I know we have been pouring information into this, is so critical. And that's why pitching in a silo by itself, right, isn't going to be enough, because if you can't grow someone who has low innate power, you know, thanks mom and dad, right? You're not a high power kid, or your training hasn't produced that for you. You've got work to do in the weight room to make sure that when it's not pitching, you know how to move fast and how to keep your movement quality. Then it makes that translation from 75 to 100%. Now we can work on I love it. You said environmental design. My nerdy brain just exploded. But now you can work on that in the context of pitching, right? But she's got to have exposure to that outside of pitching. And that's what strength and conditioning does.
Laura, if you're measuring what's happening in strength and conditioning, you want to watch an athlete's individual trends. As long as those are looking okay, they're holding steady when they need to steady, they're on the way up, and they can go up, then strength and conditioning is doing its job.
Totally.
But at the end of the day, some of those kids are still lower power kids.
Totally.
There is an innate genetic component to power where some kids will always be higher. And that you still have to know. This isn't if the strength coach is doing their job, then Susan and Sally better be able to jump the same and have the same XYZ, you know?
Absolutely.
So I think there's also this element of like you want to have accountability for strength coaches. Where's their baseline? Yeah. When do we expect the systems that you're running in strength and conditioning to hold them steady? When do we expect them to be going up? We certainly want to make sure we know if they're going down. So you might be like, we need Sally to move faster. She's going to jump. She's going to jump. She's going to jump. And what we're seeing is she's going down because she's exhausted, right? She's pitching all the time. So it's really about making sure their growth and the management of their growth looks good in strength and conditioning. I totally agree with you. Mm-hmm. But then to still know at the end of the day, wow, you've gone up in power. You're still below average in your ability to produce power, but you've gone up. Great job. But to know that you're still in this bucket of like, that's a low power kid. Yep. You know what I mean? I think it's the combination of those two worlds, and then what you do with that on the pitching side. It's like accountability with your strength system, but then also at the end of the day, this is what you've got. Yep. And so you got to know how to categorize them, and you got to know what they're going for.
And things like just my last point, speed and agility isn't in a silo by itself going to get there, right? You need a combination of loaded, right? So I'll say traditional strength and conditioning. You need overload, just like we use in the rest of our training systems. And so sometimes I'll hear athletes come in and say, well, I do speed and agility. I do a lot of ladder work. I do like some sprints, and all of that it's unweighted, right? It's not on overload. And so in terms of growing strength, you're not taxing the system enough. Right? It's just a matter of teaching them to move fast, which is great. But if movement quality doesn't improve because they are working through improving movement quality under loads and resistance, it isn't enough.
Velocity.
It isn't enough.
No, it's not enough. Right. We got to learn to move mass quickly.
And under control.
Yes. Right. So it's a reality. We're like, mic drop, end it there. That's essentially... That's it.
Cut it off.
You're trying to if you're not in control, then you've got to spend more time feeding the control, which is in that lower intensity environment. And if the relatively in control, but it's not fast enough, you can't move the mass quick enough. Yeah. It doesn't matter. You don't want to just then essentially, then you have to know that the bulk of our environment can't just be. Now, this is just when we're going for that. If you're also like, we're trying to tap into better sync on drop ball, probably to feel the arm action. That kid is going to spend more time and lower intensity for that particular intent when you're working on that concept. But we're just talking like overall with your baseline fastball, potentially going for power and patterns. That, you know, I think that's essentially again, all of the things you're considering, how you would bucket and the different approaches you would take based on those buckets.
If you're a college coach, talk to your strength coach about force velocity profiling. That's what you want to ask. You want to ask how your pitchers fall in the force velocity profile. Are they moving lots of weight slow? Are they moving no weight fast? You want them to move weight somewhat quickly, because that's what they need to do in pitching. And so that's the question you want to talk to them about, is what is each pitcher's force velocity profile right now? And what are we doing to find a place where they can meet in the middle and compromise?
Yeah. On that note, I was kind of chuckling to myself, because on that note, I'm going to go out into the travel world where none of this matters. No, just kidding.
No.
Just
Krista, I don't know. Did we hammer that one? I didn't even.
I think so. I just felt like the answer is like, it's not clear, but it's kind of, we know the answer to that one.
Kirsten, send us some feedback. Did we hammer it?
Yeah.
I know.
All right. Well, it's 96 here. And not in coaching shape. And
90 here. So
ain't none of these conversations apply to the environment I'm about to go into. So
wear your sunscreen.
Godspeed to all, and hopefully we all stay alive. Hopefully we all stay alive this weekend. That's my goal. So,
and I'll think about when you feel sorry for yourself out there. I want you to look at all those pictures for being thrown to death.
Not mine. Not mine.
Not yours.
So,
not yours.
Excuse you. My pictures are not thrown.
No, you cut me off. I was just about to say across the field.
Yes, across the field. Not mine. And then we're going to know their shapes.
Pictures being thrown to death.
We're going to know their pitch shapes, and we're going to mash them. Because I'm sure when I have talked to my 18-year-olds about pitch shapes, then we're just going to nail it, because that's how it works, you know?
Well, it's complicated. It's really hard. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Until next week from Dalton, Georgia, for me. Bye-bye.